Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever your time zone may be. My name is Joel Sam. I work with Affle and I would like to welcome you to today's session with respect to the three-part webinar series that we'll be hosting from this week, next week, and the week after. The main theme for this webinar is Libraries in Development, Advancing Library Visibility in Africa. For the first webinar, the sub-theme is Development Organization Interviews, Perceptions and Possibilities for African Libraries. Over the past 4 years, Afla and Tasha have been working on a project titled Advancing Library Visibility in Africa. It's on two streams, work stream 1 and work stream 2. Work stream 1 basically is to do with library location data. And work stream 2 is with respect to development stories. Over the years, African libraries have done a lot of work with respect to development, but the perception is this, that libraries are not doing much work in development. Libraries desire to partner with development organizations, but as to how to connect so that their impact can be felt worldwide has not happened. The question is, how do development partners choose organizations to work with? What do they look for when they are choosing partners? And how can libraries shift this perception as potential partners in development? What data, for example, will be useful to help in this direction? And what data do libraries currently have that could advance their visibility in development? Over the past 2 years, ALVA has been working to seek answers to these questions. So together, Afla and Tasha, that's the Technology and Social Change Group of the School of Information, University of Washington, have been working to provide responses to some of these questions. Work has been done, and we are going to present to you the first in the series, which is basically the findings from the research that has happened. Development organizations, perceptions and possibilities for African libraries. At the end of the day, we expect that we'll be able to present to you the key findings for you to understand the perceptions of African libraries by development organizations, and then ways to partner with them and to find ways and means of assisting libraries to use data effectively to market their services. To do the presentation will be two resource persons from Tasha. The first one is Renee Lynch, who is a research associate and a PhD candidate in English. She's been on this project since 2019. And her research interest is in English language education in Sub-Saharan Africa, decolonizing pedagogies, and then international development. The second resource person is Dr. Jason Young, a senior research scientist at Tasha. He holds a PhD in geography from the University of Washington. These are the two resource persons that we'll have for today's session. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this meeting, and especially to our champions who have worked with us since the inception of the project. from about 2017. You are most welcome. Let me indicate that this webinar is also being streamed live on our Facebook page. So those on Facebook can send in their questions, their contributions, and it will be uploaded to the Zoom link. For those of you on Zoom also, please use the chat box and then the question and answer box to send in your questions and then your contribution. At the end of the day, attendees will receive. Hello? Hello?
Go ahead, please.
I think there was a break in my system. Okay. We will send you the webinar, hello?
Please go ahead.
We can't hear you, Dr. Sam.
Oh, okay. So let me now speak briefly about the presentation. It will take about 45 to 50 minutes. And in the course of the presentation, please note that at any point, if you want to send in a question or whatever, you can use the chatbot or question and answer service. Along the line, the presenters will ask questions for discussion. And please note that we will require that you put your questions in the Q&A box. This will take about 2 to 5 minutes for us to discuss. And basically, it will be like, what experience have you had working with a development organization? And then whether or not the findings of this study is similar to or different from what you have done. That will be the first one. And then the second one will be whether or not the recommendations that we are putting across seem very feasible. So with these short remarks, I will invite Jason and Renee to start the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joel, and hello to everybody else. I just want to give my welcome to the first of this three-part webinar series presented by the Advancing Library Visibility in Africa, or ALVA project. As Dr. Sam mentioned, today's webinar is titled Development Organization Interviews, Perceptions and Possibilities for African Libraries. In this webinar, we're going to share recommendations with you on how libraries can use data about their activities to attract the attention of development organizations. We really appreciate your engagement with us, and I really hope that you leave this webinar with something useful. As was mentioned, my name is Jason Young, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Technology and Social Change Group, or TASHA, and that's with the University of Washington's Information School, located in Seattle, Washington, USA. I'm also one of the lead researchers on the ALVA project. And then today, I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Renee Lynch. Renee, do you want to introduce yourself briefly? Although
Yes.
Dr. Sam did such a good job already.
Yes, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Dr. Sam. My name is Renee Lynch, and I'm a research assistant on the Advancing Library Visibility in Africa project. I'm also a PhD student at the University of Washington, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Of course, the ALVA project is also supported by a lot more people than just the two of us. And I do want to recognize the contributions of many of the other folks on the team. So ALVA is a collaboration between TASHA and AFLIA, and additional collaborators on the project include Dr. Joel Sam, Stanley Boachi Achapong, Chris Joasis, and Bree Norlander. This presentation really wouldn't be possible without all of their contributions. I'd also like to thank the AFLIA staff that's here on the webinar today for giving us the opportunity and space to speak with all of you and share some of the work that we've been doing over the past few years. So what will we be talking about today? Here's a brief overview of today's webinar. I will start by giving some background on the ALVA project, just to set a little bit of the context for this current presentation and work. From there, Renee and I will shift to today's topic, which focuses on one smaller effort within ALVA. Dr. Sam mentioned this workstream 1, workstream 2. Specifically, we'll be talking about part of workstream 2 of the ALVA project. We'll describe some of our methods and then shift to a discussion of the findings of that project. And then there we will focus on answering these 3 questions that you see on the screen here. What are development organizations' current perceptions of African libraries? How do development organizations choose partners? And what are they looking for in partners and partnerships? From there, we will then draw some conclusions about how libraries might better market themselves for development organizations and make some specific recommendations for all of you that we're hoping will be helpful in your daily jobs and work as librarians. We will end the webinar with a Q&A session. I'll note that today's webinar, though, won't only be Renee and myself talking the whole time. As Dr. Sam mentioned, we'll also offer a few discussion questions throughout the presentation and encourage you all to type responses through the chat feature. So this will give Renee and me the opportunity to continue learning from all of you, as we've done throughout the ALVA project. And that will really continue to strengthen the work that we do. So please be ready to be actively engaged later on in the presentation. With that, I'll start to shift to sharing a bit about the background of ALVA. ALVA was created in response to a gap that Aflia and Tasha identified in relation to the role of libraries in sustainable development across the African continent. On the one hand, we sensed a growing excitement from you all, from libraries, about your role in supporting sustainable development goals, or SDGs, as well as national development plans. We've marveled at how libraries across Africa tackle development issues ranging from literacy to gender inequality and environmental sustainability, and a lot of other issues. Just a few weeks ago, in fact, Renee and I worked with 3 librarians from Ghana, Kenya, and Namibia to present their educational initiatives at the annual conference of the Comparative and International Education Society. The audience was deeply impressed to learn what librarians are doing. And so I know many of you in the audience here today are doing similarly impressive work. Through this work, Renee and I and the rest of the ALVA team know that libraries are having a huge and sustained positive impact on communities across the continent. We know that. Unfortunately, though, not everyone involved in development knows those same things. And in fact, it often seems to us that libraries are not sufficiently recognized or sufficiently supported to carry out this important development work. International development organizations in particular seem largely unaware of libraries as potential partners. ALVA was created to ask how public libraries might overcome this perception gap to attract partners and resources for their work. We believe this is important because development organizations often have access to large amounts of funding and other resources, but lack the knowledge of local community that libraries possess. It seems perfect in our mind then to bring those resources of the development organizations together with the knowledge and local capacity of public libraries. From the beginning, ALVA has been a partnership between Aflia and Tasha, with funding support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in the United States. The project's central goal, shaped by the Global Libraries Advisory Group, is to support libraries as lifelong partners to the development of communities and the continent of Africa. To achieve that goal, the project is focused on 2 primary work streams: library sites and development stories. These work streams correspond roughly to the steps we believe are necessary to get development organizations to start noticing the work being done by libraries in Africa. Step one was to get development organizations even to recognize that libraries exist in the places where they do their work. The library sites workstream did this by literally putting libraries on a map, and you can see that map there on your screen. Through an innovative process and with support from a network of in-country champions, we have mapped 730 libraries across 27 countries and collected basic information about each of them. This work is ongoing and offers a powerful visual reminder of the presence of libraries across Africa, and you can see it there. However, we want to augment this map with additional data to persuasively tell the story about why libraries make good partners in development. To tell that story, though, we needed to understand what data or other forms of evidence are persuasive to development organizations. This presentation today focuses on our attempts to figure that out within Workstream 2. Renee?
Thank you, Jason. So I'll now discuss a little bit about our methods to get at these insights about what development organizations find important in terms of choosing partners and what that means for African libraries. So the method that we chose was to conduct interviews, and in the end we conducted a total of 21 interviews with people who work at development organizations that fund or implement projects in Africa. We wanted to keep a very broad definition of development organizations in order to acknowledge the various different organizations that participate in this work. So we started with purposive sampling, where we sought context through Tasha at the University of Washington or through the websites of well-known development organizations. From there, we continued with snowball sampling, where we asked interview participants to recommend others in the field who could speak to these topics. Overall, it's important to note that we had a rather low response rate. So out of 178 people contacted, only 21 were interviewed in the end, which represents about 12% of the total. The reason we say this is because we think that it links into the overall low perception of libraries in Africa among development organizations. Some people responded saying they didn't know anything about libraries, or that they had never thought of libraries before, or simply did not respond at all, which we think feeds into this larger issue here. However, in spite of the low response rate, we did have considerable variety among the development organizations and their employees that we talked to. So the organizations were bilateral, multilateral, and non-governmental, including private foundations and faith-based groups who were based in Africa, North America, and Europe. So considering that we had a smallish sample size, we do believe that their viewpoints represent a real variety in the development organization field, which itself is very broad and very complex. In order to look at those interviews, we conducted content analysis, and this was through coding or labeling themes and creating overall ideas using a grounded theory approach, which was triangulated or cross-checked between two researchers, Jason and myself, using Deduce software. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now we'll talk about some of the findings. I'll talk broadly, and then we'll give some examples of quotes from the interviews that illustrate these overall findings. So first of all, the current perceptions of African libraries among development organizations that we talk to, those perceptions are low and limited. So low in the sense that many development organizations are still unaware that African libraries exist, and also unaware of the role that African libraries are currently playing in the development of their countries. This role that they perceive is also limited. Many development organizations, if they perceived libraries at all, thought of libraries as primarily a place for books or a place to work on literacy, but really no more than that. However, an important finding that we came up with is that it is possible to change these perceptions. And we gathered that from interviewing people who reported a change in perception of African libraries. This may be from the experience of working with an African library in the past, or talking with a colleague who had worked with African libraries, or through the very process of being asked for the interview and being prompted to think about African libraries and what potential they have for development projects. or through the course of the interview, of doing the interview, they were able to change their perception and broaden their ideas. So that's good news for us. I'll now talk about some examples that illustrate these points. So first example here is from participant 14, who says, I don't even know if we're aware, and I'm not sure we have any situational awareness around libraries in any place that would work. That's my hunch. I suspect. I wouldn't speak directly for some of our program managers, but I'm pretty sure most would say they had no idea. And participant 20, who says, a library really is a new stakeholder I had not thought of in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. So these two quotes are really illustrating that lack of awareness or lack of perception or low perception of African libraries among development organizations that we found to be a main theme. Next slide, please. More quotes here. Participant 1 says, it seems like there's got to be a connection. The connection that they're talking about there is between development and African libraries. So they say, it seems like there's got to be a connection, but I guess it's just something I never really thought much about, honestly. And participant 14 says, I think the biggest thing is it would strike me as unusual, but not bad, but unusual for a library to take on that kind of operational role. So what we're seeing here is there's some movement among the people that we talk to reconsider their perceptions and think about the fact that libraries could be something different than they imagine, or an openness to considering the fact of African libraries as they play a role in development, but not necessarily holding that perception currently. Next slide, please. So more quotes here. Participant 9 says, libraries are seen as just spaces for academic or reading or references. They're not seen as spaces for interaction, you know, as open and flexible spaces. That perception, I think, is one of the weaknesses. And participant 14 says, there is a perception barrier to get over. This somewhat caricature image that many of us would have of libraries. They're just a place of books that you go to get books and return books. That's so distant from doing development work, then it's not even on your mental radar. So again, both of these are talking about the limited perception of African libraries, that they're not seen as spaces for interaction. It's rather limited to books, references, academic work, and that this perception is a problem. However, the good news here is that there's some self-consciousness among the people that we talk to, that it's possible that that's a caricature or something that they perceive as being an opportunity that is maybe just not on their radar at the moment. Next slide, please. So this is also illustrated in participant 18, who says, this is probably more of a weakness on my side as opposed to the library side. I have a little bit of a stereotype of what libraries bring to the equation in terms of partnership. So I guess my gut is that there is a pretty narrow and specific role for libraries. So that's probably not the case. And participant 10 says a totally unexploited partnership opportunity in reference to thinking about African libraries in development. Participant 10's comment came as a response to seeing the announcement for interviews and responding. And they stated that their motivation to do this interview was because this was the first time that they had considered African libraries as a potential partner in development. And they saw that as a totally unexploited partnership opportunity. And there was real excitement or curiosity behind that to find out more about what African libraries could bring to their development work. And in the case of participant 18, they're aware that they have a stereotype or a caricature of what libraries are, as mentioned by the previous participants. And so there's a sense that there could be a potential for change, either through having more experience or more interaction with African libraries or people who have done work with African libraries in the past.
Great, thank you, Renee. So we found out development organizations don't perceive libraries, but they're open to change. The question then is, how do we change that perception? How do we make libraries more visible? So our next goal within our analysis was to answer the question, how do development organizations choose partners? What sort of evidence or data do they use in order to say, hey, yes, this organization or this individual would in fact make a good partner for us in our development work? We felt that if we know the answer to those questions, then we can collect those data about libraries and sell libraries to development organizations as ideal partners. We therefore asked our participants what data they currently use to choose partners and what data would convince them to choose a library in particular as a partner. Throughout our interviews, participants indicated that quantitative or numerical data is very important for them in their decision-making processes. Essentially, development organizations want proof grounded in data that partners are likely to succeed if given development organization support. Rightly or wrongly, quantitative data or numerical data is believed to provide a clear and objective indication of past success of a partner organization. And so you see some of the quotes from these development organizations indicating that the quantitative data allows development organizations to sell and to demonstrate undeniable success from participant 5. Participant 13 says, we really have to be numbers focused. And so we do put some of that onto the grantees as well, because really we are reaching our indicators through our partners. So in other words, they require their grantees or their partners, the people they're giving funding to collect number-based data that they can then use to demonstrate the success of the projects that they're engaged in. Most often, our participants identified output data as a potentially important source of information. Output data describe the extensiveness of services provided by organizations, and in this case, the services provided by libraries. This might include the number of books that a library has, the number of patrons, the number of staff, and more. Output data is not necessarily important because it is the most powerful type of data or the type of data that leads to the most insights. And in some cases, it's not actually the best form of data for making decisions. What it does have going for it, though, is that it's pretty easy to collect and therefore tends to be more available to partner organizations and to these development organizations. And so it can also provide development organizations with an indication of the general reach of a partner and can therefore be a really good place to start if a library is starting to collect data for the first time, because it's easily achievable and can demonstrate some of the worth of the library immediately to these development organizations. So some of the quotes from these development organization participants. Participant 16 says, is the library a place that has a lot of traffic? Is it a place where we can reach women or adolescent boys or adolescent girls? And so those questions are questions they need to answer. And they're also basic questions that can be answered by output data about the number of patrons that a library has. Participant 13 indicated that we, meaning the development organization, would want to make sure that we were able to touch a lot of our targeted populations, including marginalized groups, as a guaranteed benefit of work through a library. And so again, this is a push to get data about the patrons of the library. And in particular, in this case, they're very interested in demographic information about the subgroups of patrons that go to a particular library. Other data can be more powerful, but in some instances also harder to collect. So this would be kind of a second stage of data collection efforts for those that are already collecting output data. For example, monitoring and evaluation data provides more in-depth information on program success. This could include, for example, success at attracting various demographic groups to the library, the growth of programs or programming over time, or even patron satisfaction surveys about particular programming events or events at the library. This type of data can be very powerful, but it can also be more time-consuming to collect because it does require you to do things like track success over time or implement surveys of your patrons after programming that you do for them. Perhaps the most important and persuasive data for these development organizations is what they call impact data, which describes how library programs are changing the community around them. For example, if a library runs a reading program, impact data might describe the overall change in literacy levels within the community as a result of that program. So in other words, not just looking at the satisfaction of patrons around the program, but going out into the community and looking at that broader change and impact that the program is having on the society in the area. This can be very, very powerful and persuasive for development organizations because it describes exactly the type of social effect that development organizations are directly wanting to have within communities. However, it also takes greater expertise and resources to collect this type of data in a rigorous way. And it was referred to as by one of our participants as kind of the holy grail of data. It isn't very common. A lot of partners aren't able to collect it, but when they do collect it, it's just very, very powerful for them. Some of our participants mentioned that qualitative data are sometimes used. So that would be not numerical data, not number-based data, but more qualitative, so word-based, narrative-based data. Development organizations told us that donors, so in other words, the organizations providing funding for projects, often find that qualitative data to be less acceptable. And it seems there just isn't really a strong culture within development organizations of using that qualitative data. It's also important to note that data is not the end-all be-all of persuading development organizations. These organizations also rely on other things that may be more difficult for libraries to achieve, such as experiences with prior relationships, networking with people in the field, and other relationship-based forms of evidence about project or partner capabilities. This is a reminder for us that data is important, but not necessarily sufficient in building relationships with development organizations. And so we'll discuss that more in some of our recommendations. For now, I'm going to shift to answering the third question that our analysis had. So far we know what kinds of data libraries want, or development organizations want. Now we need to know what type of picture development organizations want that data to paint about their partners. In other words, what are they looking for in partners? Responses from participants coalesced into a handful of characteristics, many of which I think describe libraries quite well. Those include, they want partners that are community embedded institutions with local expertise. They want partners able to serve as a hub for resources, including space, data, and research. They want partners that are capable or generally functional, and partners that are flexible and have a proven track record. Here's some of quotes from participants describing those attributes and partners. Participant 10 said that they looked at libraries because what we're typically looking for in a partner is that local context, right? We're looking for a credible partner, as well as to get over that kind of threshold of being able to say, yes, we can do this. And we're working through trusted entities, right? Then that third piece, kind of that network community aspect of it, is so crucial to the delivery of a lot of, if not all of what we do. Standing up something like a local group that is unmoored from any of the community at large is really hard to do. No one wants to join. They have no association with it. It typically goes away. there's no sustainability plan for that group at the end of the project. And so that really describes this need to have a local agent that deeply understands and is connected to the community. Participant 14 says, I think there is the argument to be made that libraries, and more importantly, the people who work there, potentially have really interesting insights into both sort of lived realities of the communities in which they work, which is really important oftentimes to the work that we do. Also, they probably have interesting ways of sort of diagnosing challenges in those communities, which would bring theoretically a very multi or interdisciplinary approach to both problem identification and solution design. And I think stepping back for a moment, the really incredible thing here is these are participants that 5-10 minutes earlier said, we don't know what libraries are. We've never perceived them. We don't know, what they might do for us. And prompted just a little bit, they're saying these incredible things about the sort of local connections and relationships and ways of solving problems that now that they've thought about it, libraries could probably bring to a partnership. And so I think this is strong evidence that it just takes a little bit of data, a little bit of argument to start to get people to realize that libraries are a really strong potential source of support and partnership. And sorry. And so just to finish that thought, then development organizations do have resources, but they don't necessarily know communities well enough to produce good projects. And so this really is a key selling point for libraries because they can be that local expertise to support those development organization projects.
Thank you, Jason. So we've shared a lot so far about the types of data that development organizations might find persuasive, also what they're looking for in partners, and also how they're imagining African libraries. But we would like to take a moment to hear from you, whoever or wherever you are tuning in from today. If you would like to type into the chat, we invite responses to the following questions. Have you had experience working with development organizations? And are these findings similar to or different from your own experience? So again, feel free to type into the chat and we can read them aloud, or Dr. Sam, you can join us as well if you see comments from other forums, such as those on Facebook or other ways of connecting today.
Thank you, Renee. I think there's a comment from Ogni. I don't know if you've seen it. This is quite amazing that it has been 10 years since I did the perception study about public libraries in Africa, and perception was very similar, largely traditional. So a lot of advocacy work to be done by us all. And there's a second one from Jane. She says that given what Jason is explaining about quantitative data, wouldn't it be good to collect or assemble final reports on development projects that libraries like ours have successfully carried out? For example, on a PEP FAR grant where our outcome data was uniquely impactful because of the library setting and reach. That's from Jane, and then Jane also shared a link, and I think that you've already responded to that, but if you can speak to that. And there is another one from John who says that libraries can surely serve as data collection gateways in getting to the people in marginalized communities.
Yes, thank you for bringing our attention to all of those comments and to the example that Jane provided. I think that that's a really great way to show a mixture of numeric or quantitative data in a way that presents a story of impact. So it's not necessarily just having the data, but knowing how to present it into a narrative that shows this is the effect that we're having on the community. Because impact data is really important in terms of development organization work, but often it's a matter of creating the story of impact from the output data that you have, which is often in number form, numbers of people, numbers of programs, any changes in numbers that way. So thank you, Jane, for providing that example. I also see a comment from Fiona talking about the Creative Cities Network and being active among that network. I'm not familiar with that network specifically, but yes, I think that one of the other main points that we're trying to underscore here is that data itself, thank you, Fiona, it's a UNESCO project, is really about networking. So data is very helpful, but it has to be used in combination with other methods of building partnerships. And I believe that these are methods that many of the people watching today are already very familiar with and in fact enacting in their own library spaces. Thank you very much for your comments.
Any more from participants? Okay, there are a couple of questions also. One from John, what are your justifications for choosing purposive sampling technique? And the second one is this, that just for the sake of curiosity, do you think 12% response rate is reliable for valid decision and policy making?
Yeah, great questions. First of all, using a purposive sampling technique, I think that that was used in order to get responses. We had considered creating a general call for proposals and asking people to contact us if they were interested. However, we really wanted to target people and specifically people who would have knowledge of these issues. So what data is used in choosing partners, how partnerships are built over time, people who are involved in monitoring and evaluation. So we were really looking for a specific insight, which is why we went after certain people purposefully, and then from there used snowball sampling. As to the question about a 12% response rate being reliable and for valid decision and policy making, that's a good question. I think that we mention it to be transparent, but it's a 12% rate in those who responded to our invitation to be interviewed. I don't think that that would be relevant for making policies per se based on the response rate of the participants. But I think what's more important to focus on is the main themes across what these people are saying from really many different aspects of development, many different types of organizations that are based in different geographical areas, different structures of organization, bilateral, nonprofit, etc. So I think that the variety speaks louder than the numbers here. But of course, all of this should be taken with a grain of salt.
Thank you. And the last one says that since development organizations want quantitative data, how about the ethical and legal issues in data sharing?
Yes, that's a great question, John. Thank you very much. That's something that we're going to discuss in just a moment. It is one of our concerns as we talk specifically about the idea that development organizations would like access or information about marginalized populations specifically. That does raise ethical concerns for us. And I think it's something for the African library community to be thinking about going forward, about what is the role of data privacy or protection, considering the risks involved.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll continue. We'd like to talk a little bit more about these implications. So thank you for offering your feedback up until this point, but we'd like to pivot now to think about what will we do with this information? So how can African libraries use data effectively to market themselves to organizations? So as we've been mentioning, it's important to use output data to demonstrate capacity, or that libraries are capable of contributing to development projects. This is because development organizations want partners who are functional, who can contribute, who can implement programs and have special insights into the communities to make those programs happen. So output data here can be considered any data on the usage or services of the libraries, with the usage being numbers of visits or visitors and demographics of users specifically. We know that these are important, but overall, we're trying to weave that into a story that says libraries are capable. We have capacity to implement the project. And within that, quantitative data and impact data are preferred. So again, impact data is challenging to get, but we can use quantitative data and output data to create those stories, as we've seen an example of today. But also acknowledging that data needs may vary considerably, and so it's good to collect a variety of data if possible. And along with that, data alone is not enough. So even though we're offering these specific things today, it's really good to keep in mind that each organization and each project has different needs. Certainly the funder plays a large role in what the data is that they're asking for or seeing as valuable. And so it's good to be flexible, again, as our development organization interviews have highlighted. Within that, we would also recommend these specific roles for marketing libraries as community embedded institutions. Again, institutions that are aware of the challenges in the local community, are in touch or trusted by the people in the local community, and who can offer unique insights into what's happening there. And also development resource hubs in terms of space, data, and research. So if development organizations can see that libraries do have space that's available to be used for various different development purposes, they may have data about library users that could be useful. And also they may be housing research or connected to other organizations that are doing research that can again provide that insight locally. So in summary, these are the recommendations that we would give for library systems specifically. We would recommend framing the work in terms of connections to the local community, attention to marginalized groups, and past successes in implementing programs. Also collecting quantitative data on library usage and user demographics, but again, collecting a variety of data if possible to remain flexible for the various different needs. And continuing to network. For international audiences, consider promoting library strengths as community embedded institutions and hubs for development resources, including space, data, and research. So we'd like to take a moment to talk about some of our concerns, as I had mentioned in response to John's question about what does this mean for African libraries? So some of the concerns that we had as researchers were considering the fact that this requires a lot of extra labor for libraries and librarians. It requires resources and capacities that some simply do not have available to them. And in many cases, it's a lot of responsibility to collect data, to analyze that data, to put that data together into a presentation format or into a report format that the development organization is requiring. And often that's responsibility that's expected without support from the development organization about how to do that. And it may require time and resources, again, that are beyond the current capacity of the library, given all of the other things that they're doing in their communities. There's also a concern about networking and access to the networks. So as our development organization participants were talking about, having referrals from colleagues or word of mouth, or having worked with a development organization in the past, this brings up the question of how do libraries break into that network that seems kind of closed at this point. And our main project is trying to get in there, but it's also comes with an awareness that that can be quite challenging. And data usage. How exactly is this data that libraries are offering going to be used? There's a concern about exposure of library users and their data. Concerns related to that could be possible identity theft, if it's information that could be used against them or to steal identity. Data misuse, if the data about the library is used in ways that are differently positioned. And also the idea of data selling or extracting, whereas some websites will take data about someone's web traffic and use that to sell advertisements, for example, as Facebook does. And that is a really extractive model where someone else is benefiting from the data and not necessarily the users whose data they have. And we think that overall, this hints at the idea that it could be reinforcing colonial patterns of power and asking the big question, who controls the development funding and who controls the development projects, which is something to keep in mind in these partnerships that are not necessarily always two-sided. There's always power in terms of who has more control or more say over what's happening. So we have a few quotes to illustrate these issues. Participant 13 says, all of the numbers of our projects have been passed up to the city. So we, in terms of the project, we really have to be numbers focused. And so we do put some of that onto our grantees as well, because really we are achieving a lot of our, reaching our indicators through our partners. This is a quote that was mentioned earlier, but now I'd like us to consider this in the context of what this person is saying, that they do put some of that work onto their grantees. So there's an awareness there that they're asking a lot of the grantee to collect data, analyze it, put it together in that format, and that the organization is achieving their indicators through their partners. So essentially the partner is doing the work of development while the organization benefits. And so it asks the question of how is the library benefiting, how is the community benefiting, and really putting that power issue into focus. Likewise, participant 5 says, I think that in terms of the services that libraries provide, they should actually consider the private sector to be competitors. They should try to compete with an internet cafe or a cafe. They should treat themselves not like something that is funded by public money, and therefore you don't have to be dynamic, but actually consider letting them make money or initial income or have bonuses, which I think brings up a lot of concerns as well. Libraries are public institutions. They're, public libraries are public institutions, but it brings up the question of who is the library serving? If they're serving the common good or if they're serving the community, that may be in conflict to thinking about a library in a more business or competitive development sort of way. And so that may change the nature of the library and the work that it does. And we're not sure what kind of effects that would have. Next slide, please. So we'll end here today with 2 quotes from participant 7 and participant 9, who are directly involved in library work within development organizations that really highlight the issue of the extra labor that this asks of libraries. So participant 7 says, development agencies don't work with libraries because they don't know how libraries can contribute. So instead of blaming them, I blame our service. We did not sell our service well to the development agencies so they can come and partner with us. So the problem indicates our own weakness. Participant 9 says, you have to fight. Sorry, you have to fight. We librarians have to fight for our space to showcase the work that we do because it does not come natural to the leadership. So overall, this asks questions about what is required of libraries and also why is it required of libraries, and what can we offer to other stakeholders in this space to share some of that responsibility or have some two-way directionality of the change that we're expecting here. So I think that these are questions that I will ask us to respond to in the question and answer session. So perhaps we will be going there shortly, but these are things to keep in mind. Do these recommendations seem feasible to implement? Do you share these concerns about labor, network access, data exposure, and colonialism? And what types of support would you need in order to implement these?
Great. Yeah, sorry, I think we're running low on time, so we're not going to pause there and have that discussion. But just a couple of final notes. We do want to note that, of course, the onus shouldn't only be on libraries to change their practices. But there are also a lot of other organizations and actors involved in this space that also have a responsibility to kind of change their behaviors to be better partners also for libraries. And so we offer also recommendations for other organizations, including library support organizations and associations. And because we're running out of time, I'm not going to read all of those recommendations, but this presentation will be available to everyone after the fact to kind of take a look at these if they are in fact of interest to you. But library support organizations can do things like provide some of the training that might be necessary in order to do this additional data collection or advocacy type of work. Development organizations also have responsibilities to, it shouldn't only be libraries coming to development organizations, but development organizations going to libraries, because libraries have a lot to offer. So we have recommendations for them. And then also for researchers like Renee and myself and the rest of the ALVA team, there's a lot more work to be done. And some of the questions I think in the Q&A are already pointing to that, that this really is just an initial step, even though as Unye has pointed out, this is an initial step that's been going on for a long time, and yet there's still a lot of work to be done, we think. And so there are next steps for research projects as well. But with that, I will end there and open it up to your questions, and hopefully we can continue the conversation through the Q&A. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. And we really hope this is just one part of a much longer engagement and conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason and Renee, and thank you very much all for participating. There is a comment from John, which says that, let me read that. The recommendations are very timely and should be pursued by libraries in Africa. Can John probably elaborate on this? In line with the questions that were asked. Renee, can you put the questions back? So that maybe if any other participant has any suggestions to make.
Yes, great point. Jason, would you mind going back to the slide that had the last set of discussion questions?
There is a commendation, says great insights, colleagues, very interesting. So let's keep talking and sharing. So the question is, are these recommendations feasible to implement? And do you share the concerns that were raised with respect to labor, network, colonialism, data exposure? Let me go back to the Q&A. There is please, would you send us or the webinar presentations? Or, well, the presentations will be sent to all of you. For those on Facebook, please register. Once you register, we'll send it to your email. And those of you who have already registered for this session, you don't need to register again for the second and the third sessions. So please use the Q&A box for any questions that you may have, any comments. There is one comment says, thank you extremely. Sharing these recommendations. Maybe we need support to turn these recommendations into an action plan. So I learned a lot from the research. Hopefully listening to the presentation again will help. Okay, to be sent to you, Gilma. Another one says it's an informative session. Okay, whilst waiting for the questions, for the questions and then for your contribution, let me mention that the third in the series will be a panel discussion on the recommendations from the ALVA project. We are privileged to have the Director of Library Services from Ghana, from Kenya, and from South Africa to be with us during that session, which will be on the 14th of July. So please tell your colleagues to tell somebody else that yes, this is coming on. Next week, that will be on library survey, current data practices in African libraries. And this will be basically about the views of the various library systems in Africa. All right. This first one is to do with that of development partners. The second one will be that of the library people themselves. And then the third one will be discussion by the library directors of Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. Please, you can't miss those sessions. So do well to join us. John has a comment again. Findings from this survey will surely chart a new path for libraries in Africa. I also agree that we have not been doing enough in marketing our services. You are right on point, John. So what do? We need to market ourselves, right? It's how much we sell ourselves that will be bought. If we sell ourselves lowly, we'll be bought lowly, right? So please, let's do that. And also please note that the presentations are being recorded and will be uploaded on the AFLA YouTube channel. So you can also go there to view and to listen. John says that in all honesty, if you are not ready for extra labor, gain more access through networking and develop a fighting spirit for excellence, then nothing will change. Thanks to the researchers. Let me repeat what John is saying, that in all honesty, if we are not ready for extra labor, so the question is, are we ready for extra labor? Are we ready to break our back, to gain more access through networking? Will we be only in silos? The research work is telling us to network and network and network, and then develop a fighting spirit for excellence, not the fighting spirit in the boxing ring, but fighting spirits for excellence. If we don't do this, nothing will change. I think it's food for thought for all of us to take into considerations. Nina says, in order, we librarians need to have a change of mindset. Okay. That's a good one there, saying that we need to have a change of mindset.
That's one comment in the Q&A. So.
Okay, sure. It is good for African librarians to get out of our box and strive to fit the 21st century library operations. That's a good one. Another comment says that there is definitely the need to incorporate some different skills in those attending our library training institutions on the continent. plus some good opportunities for continuous professional development. Finally, AFLIA has to enhance African librarians to market themselves. It has to create a platform on its website. Well noted.
Doc, if you can chip in the bit about the Alpha platform, that I think that is a direct response to what Mulligata is saying about the data library locations platform.
No, come again, Stanley.
Yeah, so in relation to Mulligata's question or suggestion, earlier in the presentation, Jason had mentioned that the Alva project is in two main work streams. The first one is actually seeking to do exactly what
Okay.
Mulligata is saying, which is trying to have a platform that enhances library visibility, identifying their locations,
Yeah.
telling what
Yeah.
services
Yeah.
they are offering and all. But this is work still ongoing, and definitely you would get to know and hear more about it when the platform is ready. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think the series is just about the work stream 2, but I think as Jason said earlier, and Stanley has just indicated, there is work stream 1, which is on the library visibility. I mean the data, library location data, and all those kinds of. And I believe that in the presentation, the first 2 slides also showed where the libraries are located on the map and all those kinds of things. So I mean these are things that are ongoing, which are part of the project. There's a comment says that I'm glad I'm part of this. The fact remains that nobody can sing our song if we librarians do not rise to the challenge of marketing our products and services. Thank you very much for organizing this webinar and for upcoming with very appropriate and critical topics for presentations. Any more? Okay. I would like to thank you, especially Jason and Renee and Chris, and all those who are just waking up to join us. For some of us, we are in the afternoon. Others, it's evening. But for Jason, Chris, Renee, and the rest, it's morning. I'm not too sure whether they will go back to bed or they will continue to work in the interest of humanity. Thank you very much. And it's been very exciting having you around. And I think that the feedback that we are getting gives us more encouragement to continue to work hard and to continue to engage you in the work. And I believe that this will not just be the end, but you continue to use the various lanes that have been shared with you and to give us feedback on the work that we are doing. And from the suggestions that others have made, I mean, we need to continue to market ourselves. Let us break our back. Let's not work in silos, network. Let's show our work that yes, indeed, we are contributing to the SDGs, we are contributing to the AU 2063 as librarians. We are not what we used to be in the 19th and the 20th century. This is 21st century, and librarians are on the move. So thank you very much. And I would like to announce again that next week, same time, we'll have the second in the series, and that will also be presented by Jason and Renee. That will be library survey, current data practices in African libraries. And let me mention finally that on the 14th of July at the same time, there will be a panel discussion on the recommendations by 3 library directors in Africa, from Ghana, from Kenya, and from South Africa. So please The registration link is still open. Encourage your colleagues to register. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Renee. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody. I will end the session in the next 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Sam. Thank you, Stanley. And thank you everyone else for being here and supporting all of the things behind the scenes. Thank you very much for all of your efforts.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.